Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast. Cast your mind back to the spring of 2000. Donald Trump had withdrawn from the U.S. presidential race, Britney Spears was topping the music charts, and this was the biggest and most controversial program on TV.
Okay, the rules of the game are simple. The first person who refuses to eat a bug loses immunity for their tribe. Lose immunity, your tribe must vote one of its members off the island at tonight's tribal council.
The bugs were as big as your thumb. They were live and wriggling, and the reaction of the contestants, down to their gag reflexes, was as real as it gets.
I can't do it! You've been to Chinese restaurants, you've eaten worse, they're just smaller. Ah! Eat it!
Come on, man.
Survivor launched a new era in entertainment. It reshaped the TV landscape, the broader culture, and even our politics, as reflected in the presence of Donald Trump on the debate stage tonight. The history of reality TV, which is longer than you might think, is the subject of a new book by Pulitzer Prize-winning TV critic Emily Nussbaum. The book is called Cue the Sun. Emily joins us from New York City. Emily, hello.
Hello.
Why, of all things, is reality television a genre that deserves serious critical attention from a serious critic like you?
Well, I don't know whether I'm a serious critic, but it deserves attention because people can't look away from it. It deserves attention because it gets attention. It's central to the culture. And yet I do feel like people regard it often as a triviality, as a guilty pleasure. And this book was an attempt not to take it seriously exactly, but to regard it thoughtfully, to treat it as a meaningful genre and something that didn't come out of nowhere. It was about telling the origin story. Where did reality television come from?
You sat on this for 2 decades.
Well, I didn't, I sat on it, but that was because in 2003, when I first came up with the idea, I was excited about what was going on, which was this strange explosion of productivity in Hollywood post-Survivor, and this embarrassing habit I had of watching this streaming version of Big Brother that had just come to the United States, which I was very compelled by and very embarrassed by. And so I had this idea that I would write about what was going on in Hollywood, just go out there and cover it. And a friend said to me, better write that fast. And his argument was, it's a trend. It's going to disappear within 2 years. By the time you write a book, it'll be over. And so, yeah, I sat on it, but that actually ended up being the right thing to do, because by the time I got around to writing about it, it had, among other things, elected a president. It had changed everybody's relationship with their identities, with the way they watch TV, and it had changed the industry itself.
Well, no, and I guess the reason that I asked that first question and then talked about the fact that somebody that you spoke to thought it was just going to be a trend that would disappear is because you can imagine, even as we start, there are people who are thinking, come on, shows like Survivor, Big Brother, The Bachelor, Love Island, whatever. I mean, it's just trashy, exploitative TV. And it's stupid and it's cruel beyond that. Are they wrong in thinking that?
They're not wrong. Sometimes it is exploitative, stupid, and cruel, but sometimes it's other things as well. Like, this book is not a defense of reality and it's not a condemnation of reality. It's a reported nonfiction book that's an attempt to tell the story of reality television, primarily in the voices of the people who created it on both sides of the camera, the cast members and the crew members. I would never deny that there's a dark side to reality. And one of the complexities of writing the book was finding the right balance where you can acknowledge all of that ugly stuff, but also talk about the meaningful reasons why people have embraced it. And part of that really is because of seeing people like themselves on television. The way I talk about it in the book is I call it dirty documentary, which is essentially it's cinema verite documentary where you just observe and try to collect the truth. It's this sort of elevated art form merged with much more commercial things like game shows and soap operas to speed it up and put pressure on the people in it. But the thing is, I've watched reality television. I think there are legitimate and powerful reasons that people watch it. And certainly it's been influential, even if you think it's trash.
There's that idea that I guess the appeal is that it, and you've hinted at this, it offers something authentic buried in something that's fake.
Exactly. Like, the setting is contrived, but I think that even on spectacularly artificial shows, and also on shows that are more authentic, what audiences are looking for is that little glimmer of unfakeable emotion. And when you trace the history of reality, this occurs over and over again. And you played that moment on Survivor. Survivor was a really controversial show when it came out. And that bug eating scene just appalled people. Of course, it was a massive hit as well. But the thing is, that was an unfakeable reaction. It was Jervis, who was the cast member on the show who ate the bug, told me that the producers actually knew that he was frightened of caterpillars. It's something he had told them during his psych session with them, like when he had psychological testing before. So they understood that by giving anyone a squirming live bug to eat is going to shock them. But the result is that you get this thing on camera that's very riveting, which is somebody's, terror and courage. This sounds like a trivial and disgusting example of this, but I think across the genre, you get these glimmering moments of powerful authenticity that, frankly, you can't get on a scripted show.
I think it's interesting that you almost said he was a character.
Yeah.
Because they are characters, right?
Absolutely. The period that I'm tracing in the book, which runs, and I know this sounds like a long time ago for people when I bring it up, but it runs from radio in the 1940s through around 2009, is a period of a lot of innocence in reality television. A lot of the people who I spoke to who went on these shows were going on shows like nothing that had ever been on TV. So yes, they were made into characters, but when they went on them, they really genuinely didn't know what they were getting into. But yes, the end result is you end up being part of a narrative. Mm. And, people had different responses to that. For some people, it was very traumatic. For some people, it was kind of liberating. It's complicated to talk to the early reality stars, because definitely being launched into tremendous fame where everybody feels like they know you, but you're making no money is not ideal.
There are amazing characters in this book. Who is the Ayatollah of Trasharola?
That is Chuck Barris, who's the auteur of, the dating game, the newlywed game, the Gong Show.
You're going to love this lady. She can sing so nicely. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Deborah Williams.
Love me!
And who was this charismatic, sinister figure, which I would say both of those qualities match a lot of the creators of reality TV, these kind of swashbuckling, piratical figures. And he brought those shows to Hollywood and he appalled everyone. Everyone thought they were garbage. Sometimes they were garbage, but they were tremendously popular and they were also very lucrative, which was the whole point. But one thing I will say about him was he was actually pulling old things from radio. Mm. This is a recurrent set of formats where you put people who are dating, you put a wall between them. They had that on radio. They had it on the Chuck Barris shows. They have it on Love is Blind. It's clearly something people want to see and hear.
What about Candid Camera? What was Candid Camera for people who don't remember? So
Candid Camera is a crucial show in this history. It's the first prank show. And it actually started as Candid Microphone on the radio. Created by a man named Alan Funt, who people may have heard of depending on their age, but who was tremendously famous and who was the host of the show. And he was also essentially the first reality producer in the sense that he was an instigator. He would get in there and he would create an uncomfortable situation that tricked somebody and forced them into a response while they were being secretly taped.
There's a camera in the back of this car here.
Yeah.
And the three of us are on television now.
So what?
See? Are you out?
No. What is this, a Candid
Camera?
Oh, well, here I am.
People remember that show often very nostalgically. Sometimes when I talk about this subject, they say, oh, yeah, Candid Camera was so sweet. And it does have some sweet stuff on it. But people recognized it right at the start as something very upsetting and destabilizing as well, because you're watching people be tricked. I mean, that's at the heart of it. And you're watching people be out of control. And I think those two qualities are what make a lot of reality shows very watchable and also make the audience feel like they're colluding in it.
Well, I want to play a little bit from Candid Camera. This is from 1963. Have a listen.
Bobby, what time do you have?
3:20. I may be wrong. Do you have the time, sir?
Yeah, 3:22.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, everything's in order. And congratulations, by the way.
What?
That was your pilot.
My pilot?
What's the matter?
That girl?
Yes, sir. It's a new service.
Emily, what's going on there?
They've done a prank in 1963 where people are told that their pilot for their airplane flight is a woman, and it's so upsetting and shocking to them. You get this amazing set of responses. This was actually, I have to say, one of the greatest parts of Candid Camera is the way that it interrogated all sorts of social changes and issues about conformity and biases. And I have to say, this sketch is still pretty shocking to see because I think the stewardess also responds by going, "What? Don't tell the passengers." People are so upset that there's a female pilot.
You write that Alan Funt, the creator of Candid Camera, has a showman's impulse for turning people's taboo desires into theater and a flexible attitude toward consent. How do you think those values and qualities help shape reality TV in the years that followed?
Well, I do think it's what makes Alan Funt and Chuck Barris and several of the other people, who are mostly guys, but there are women in there as well, who created these shows. It's the reason that they created them is that they had those qualities. They had a theatrical entrepreneurialism, and they had a disregard for exactly who they were steamrollering some of the time. So the issue about consent is, I think, pretty central to these shows. Of course, look, at a certain point, it's not as though people are being secretly taped the way they were on Candid Camera, but there are other ways that you can put people under duress and under pressure and get certain kinds of responses from them. And a lot of this book includes interviews not with cast members, but with crew members, including field producers. And this is what field producers do, is that they put pressure on the people that they're interviewing, that they're putting through their paces. They develop relationships with them. And I sort of explore the kinds of tools of that. Some of them are pretty shady, and other ones are just, they're artistic producing techniques. But you can, ask a person a question over and over and over again until you make them cry. You can lie to them. You can trick them. These are things that I talk about, especially in the chapter on The Bachelor. And that stuff is invisible to the audience. So I sort of try to explore this question of the blurry gray areas of consent and manipulation that are pretty central to that primal relationship between the producer and the cast member.
I mean, these are real people, right? So one of the things that happens is that there are real-life consequences when they go through something like this. What stands out to you about that? Because it doesn't seem as though, when people are voted off the island or when they're kicked out of the house or what have you, that there's any sort of support for these people.
No, I don't think there is any sort of support for these people. And I think that's true even on contemporary reality shows. I feel like people are often not very sympathetic to people who appear in reality shows. They say, well, they knew what they were getting into, and they call them fame whores, and they talk about their need for attention. And I really think, I have to say, one thing from writing the book is I've become deeply sympathetic with people becoming clowns to the world and having people withdraw sympathy from them. Because I think it's a little hard to imagine what it's like to be on a show like that under that kind of pressure unless you've been through it. A lot of the cast members that I spoke to said that the only people that they could truly talk to about these experiences were other cast members. There are people I spoke to, like the second person who left the first season of Big Brother in the United States was a stripper who had gone on the show, excited about it. And I know this sounds crazy, almost as a kind of public therapy. And when she left, she went online, because the internet was relatively new, and found people all over the country, all over the world, just condemning and scorning her. It was the most traumatic, toxic experience for her. And you can say, well, maybe she should have expected that. But she also felt like she was undiagnosed mentally ill. She understands in retrospect that that's part of why she was cast. So I think that there are all kinds of vulnerabilities that people go into these shows with. Some of them, the producers are not trying to take advantage of, and it just happens. But sometimes producers literally seek out people who have the kind of instability that makes good drama and good TV, but leaves a lot of lasting damage.
I want to ask about the role of editing and those producers. In the first season of The Bachelor, one of the most famous moments is when one of the contestants becomes emotional after being eliminated. Have a listen to this.
I just can't breathe. Just one deep breath, please. I was outside and I heard
heard everybody start running out the front door. And so I came back inside. I was like, what's going on? And they were like, Rhonda just had some kind of attack. The paramedics are here.
What's the matter? Upset? Yes, no, maybe so?
Yeah.
You need to try and breathe through your nose, okay?
I can't even breathe.
So these shows live in many ways in the edit. What you see is perhaps not what is entirely unfolding in real life. There's a term for one of the behind-the-scenes roles in reality TV. What is, am I saying this right, a predator?
Well, a predator is just a term of art for a producer plus an editor. It's actually a job where a person can do both jobs. It makes them very marketable. I actually thought you were going to say a Frankenbite.
Well, because that too.
That's the editing thing where somebody cuts together words that it puts them together to make a sentence nobody has ever heard before. There was an editor that I interviewed for the book who told me about a time that a guy on one of the spin-offs of The Bachelor couldn't express his emotions, so she took the word but, she took him saying she took him saying flies, and she made the sentence, I have butterflies. So there's a lot editors can do, although I have to say that clip you just played was not in any way, it was deceptively edited because you didn't know exactly what she was responding to, but it was a genuine emotion, and it's really heartbreaking to hear, actually, because that was Rhonda from the first season of The Bachelor, and she was having a panic attack. They played it on the air, but, her account of it, it's very understandable that she had a panic attack. She was under so much pressure, and they later took the audio of her talking to the therapist, which she didn't know was being taken, and released it as like an audio extra online. And she became there's always on The Bachelor, there's one crazy stalker girl, and that's how she was portrayed. So it was a combination of genuine pressure and deceptive editing, which is kind of the secret sauce for a show like The Bachelor. That was one of the more fun but unnerving chapters to report on because the stories are so wild. And I have to say, people's responses to them are wild too. Rhonda, who was having that panic attack, I talked to lots of people, including several producers from The Bachelor who sort of denounced The Bachelor. Rhonda was the clown on that first season, and she was the laughingstock. She watches The Bachelor. And she said to me, she was like, at this point, anybody who goes on it, they know what they're getting into. I just found it really often very surprising how people who made these shows would respond to things.
Do people think differently about that now? Those who might have entered the house or gone on the island at the very beginning may not have known what they were in for. But now, is that different? Do people act differently now?
Yes. I think it's definitively true that when people go on reality shows at this point, they've watched reality television. Often when they go on a show like Survivor, they're practically a PhD in Survivor. Like they understand how the show works, and that's why they're going on. And of course, there's a lot more fakery on reality television in ways that are deliberate, and they're both efficient because it's easier to produce something if you just tell a person, go into the kitchen and get in a fight. I make this argument, and I think this is one of the many contradictions about reality television is that the faker the show is, the more ethical it is. Because at that point, it is just improvising and kind of a collaboration between cast and crew to create something that where they're characters and they're doing a story and it's sort of based on them, but they're actually participating in it. A show that has much more authentic emotions, there may be human and powerful qualities to it, but it's almost by definition a more ethically fraught situation because those are real emotions and the people can't control themselves. So I think there's a continuum on TV. There's definitely shows that I think people understand are primarily fake, and there are other shows which are much, much realer, and then there are most shows which are in between where I think part of the entertainment for the audience is feeling that things are simultaneously fake and real, or treating it like a puzzle and trying to figure out which is which.
Before I let you go, I have to ask about Donald Trump and The Apprentice. You speak with people who worked on that program. Some of them have a sense of remorse. They feel as though they created a false impression of Donald Trump. How much do you think that program was responsible for his political career?
I have no question about this. I know other people may disagree with me, but Donald Trump was elected because of that show. I don't think that political journalists took the show seriously enough when he was rising, partially because of the way that people regard reality television in general is as a triviality and something they don't have to think about. But that show was wildly successful, very entertaining, very well made, especially the first season. And at the same time, it doubled as something else. It was a remarketing of Donald Trump.
I've mastered the art of the deal and have turned the name Trump into the highest quality brand. And as the master, I want to pass along my knowledge to somebody else. I'm looking for The Apprentice.
It took an incredibly shoddy, mediocre product, and it shined it up and rebranded it so that people thought of him as this fantastic, ultimate businessman that anybody would want to work for. That's the outcome of the show. And yeah, it was fascinating. I talked to lots of crew members kind of up and down the call sheet, from top producers to people who worked as assistants. And many of them told me they felt guilty. And some of the people who were lower on the call sheet expressed this much more directly, that they were responsible for getting this guy into the White House. I think the higher up people were, the harder it was, because there's a sort of cognitive dissonance in being proud of your work and not wanting to take blame for it. And there was another thing also, which is that even while the show was being made, people who were making it thought, a lot of them knew he was corrupt, a deadbeat, and thought of it kind of as a comedy, thought of him as a clown. But I remember, I think it was a cameraman who I spoke to who was like, but the cast members didn't see it that way. They were business people and they wanted to work for him. So that divide between the two sides of the camera and their attitudes toward Donald Trump is fascinating to me. But I think at this point, there's just no denying it. I mean, not only did it get him into the White House, but then he went into the White House and used the tools of reality television to govern. Like, he held meetings at the Oval Office that were did replicate what happened in the boardroom, gathering people around to praise him. He staged all sorts of things like a competition between two potential Supreme Court justices, as though it was a reality competition. So it all leaked over into real life in a way that I think the people who made that show and were at the center of that show can't help but feel unnerved by.
What do you think, just finally, what do you think it says about us that these shows are so popular?
I mean, I think it says so many different things that it's hard to summarize it. I mean, I don't think it's strange that these shows are popular, and I'm not immune to this. A lot of these shows I loved. I loved early. I watched a lot of it's why I wrote about it. I watched the first 12 seasons of The Real World through Vegas, where I really didn't like Vegas, so I stopped watching. And I watched a lot of early Big Brother. And when I watched Big Brother, I did feel unsettled by my compulsion to watch it, but there was something so raw about watching regular people's behavior. And, I read about the show from 1973 called An American Family, and it was about a family in California, and it was shown on PBS. It was a documentary, but it was the intimacy of it. You watched a family go through a divorce. It was the first gay man on television. It was just stuff that you could not see elsewhere. So part of it is just, to me, a completely understandable desire for people to see human behavior on television. Like, these shows violate categories of public and private, but there's nothing wrong with wanting to see other people and to see intimate stories told publicly. It's more the other parts of it, the crueler or more exploitative or more deceptive parts of it, that do raise questions to me about, because there are other reasons people watch as well. They want to judge people and they want to be entertained by people's humiliation. It's just that you can't string those things apart. That they're all part of the genre. And I think it's worth looking at closely, specifically because of that combination of factors.
Emily, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Emily Nussbaum is a Pulitzer Prize-winning TV critic and staff writer at The New Yorker. Her new book is called Cue the Sun, The Invention of Reality TV. She was in New York City.